Thanks. Yeah. Mike, it's purchased by the wonderful people at Lambda School for me. Thank you for the compliments on the giraffe sweater. Cool. My name's Ryan Hamblin. We've met. Um, I work as the program director here for the Full Stack Web program. So a lot of the curriculum that Dustin has been going over, I helped co-author. Um, I taught for many iterations here at Lambda School. So you're seeing a lot of the curriculum and where it's at today in its full glory. And there's obviously always room for improvements. So um, React, it's a super fun concept. It's a super awesome library, and it's something that I'm very passionate about. I've spent, basically since the latter part of 2014 or the early part of 2014, learning React as it came out of beta, as it was sort of becoming popular, and as it took off. I was lucky enough to get a job early on in it, and so I've seen it transform, and I'm sure you will see it transform many times throughout your careers. It's just one of those libraries that's gonna, I think, stand up for many years to come. That doesn't mean that it couldn't be obsolete in 5 to 10 years, but it's one of those that teaches you so many good programming principles, especially through the lens of JavaScript. So yeah, we're really thrilled to be able to teach it as part of our curriculum here. I love it. So yeah, just a little bit of little musing there this morning to buy some time as people are still filtering in. So cool. So we're going to talk this morning in sort of a Q&A format. I want to clear up any lingering questions that you may have throughout your intermediate React week, or even dating back to last week as you started diving into this library. And I want to make sure that we get exposure to, things that are troubling us today. And then, of course, we will touch on styling a React application using the styled components library. So here is my Q&A thread that I'd like for you to let me know how you're feeling about higher order components, or just data separation in terms of this project. I know there were a couple of comments or concerns about better common practices when using this data set and things like that. So it's crazy listening to your voice at normal speed after 1.5 this whole week. Well, that's awesome. Yeah, those videos, I tend to talk a little slower, type a little slower, hopefully. People do, that was my #1 feedback forever, was Ryan talks too fast, Ryan types too fast. So I've learned how to, I don't know, format my teaching style. So, okay. So there's a Q&A thread. What would you like me to cover first this morning? Would you like me to start with higher order components, just a refresher? Or would you rather me dive into the data set that you've been working with and talk about that comments dilemma? So a lot of y'all are faced with the dilemma of, do I add a comment to the comments array by looping over all of the posts, finding the post by specific ID, then adding it to that comments array? Or should I delineate and slice that state off, or slice those comments off on their own state object and just deal with it in that local state object? Awesome. Adam says, it's great to see the higher order component being used in the login page functionality, but I'm struggling to think of another example that structure would be used in. Awesome. Let's make an example today. Okay, awesome. It looks like unanimously the 3 that commented so far are into the higher order components idea. So let me make sure I share my screen so you know what I'm talking about. So this little code sandbox you can find in Training Kit. It's available to you there, along with the pre-class video and the material that's written out. So you can follow along with this link there. I just simply took a fork of this link. Actually, I don't know if I forked it earlier, so I'm going to make sure I do, so that if it's the same link in Training Kit, you don't get any of these edits there, or future students don't get any of these edits. But if you want to follow along and kind of maybe try and keep up a little bit for this little review, I will let you do so. And then Samuel mentioned definitely where to put state. Adam said comments dilemma and getting filter to work on search. Okay, we can talk about the search and filter. Those are yeah, we can definitely break that down into a smaller problem, so we can get there. Okay, awesome, cool. So let's dive into higher order component first, and let's start there. So first off, to make this feel at home, I'm going to make a new file, and we're going to call that file hocbutton.js. And like with everything in React, ooh, this is not reloading. There we go. Like with everything in React, we need to import React from React, of course. And then we're just going to create a component that will extend out the base class. But first, our component is just going to be a simple functional component that's going to receive a component as its argument. Okay, so that's what the higher order component principle is. It's just like a function in JavaScript that takes in a function as an argument. But in this case, it's just a component. So, and components are all just functions. Surprise. So, and they, that return objects and data. So, HOC button. Why would we want to do something like this in the real world? Well, let's say that we have a button that's gonna basically behave and act the same way as it would across many other instances in our application. So I'm going to say this is going to take in some button component, and it's going to return the class, the anonymous class, React dot, class, yeah. Sorry, I've been programming in other languages and contexts, so I'm just trying to remember all my syntax. Okay, so class extends React.component, which of course is going to be like any other React base class that we extend, or in any component that is going to be stateful, that's going to take in some sort of state. And then of course, because we're extending the React.component, what's the one method that is absolutely necessary that we need to have available to us? And you want me to live code this, live share? Is that what you're saying? Yenrong, I can do that. I can do a live share. So the live share has been a little buggy for me in the past. We'll see if they've gotten a little bit better. I can always make it so that, there we go, classroom setting. Cool. So I can always just stop it. So yeah, we both need to render. So first and foremost, we need to render. And here's what's funny. Y'all are mentioning some really interesting things, like the fact that constructor is needed, but it's actually not necessary anymore with newer versions of Babel transpiling our JavaScript, because we can actually just put a state object on our class like this, and it will behave as if the constructor method sets it up, which is kind of fun. It's a little shortcut. But we're going to stick with the constructor method for state, because that's the more traditional sense. And then when you see syntax that just says, oh, we're skipping the constructor method altogether, like this, when you see syntax that's like this, then you won't be afraid of it. So that's kind of how I like to live my life, is as a teacher, is like, hey, I want to stick with the things that were, that are still there, so that we understand this principle that we learned about when we're learning about classes in JavaScript anyway. I want to stick with this constructor principle, and I want to, now when new stuff comes out or newer versions of JavaScript exist, you won't be afraid. So you now have seen that. So Link is missing a part. Oh, weird. Sorry. So there you go. Camry asked a very good question. Can you do that with your lifecycle methods as well? I think lifecycle methods you just keep on there, like, you know, component will mount, or that's deprecated. So like if you had a component did catch, you just keep on there as methods. There's no reason why I would, because you don't need to bind these anyway, because they come from the base class. So it's a very good question. Anything that you would need to manually bind, you can abstract with the, I forget the name of the syntax, but it's basically just sort of using an arrow function to bind it lexically, and it's totally valid. So like something like this, some cool listener would be a constructor method that returns something, and this would be implicitly bound to the class context. So kind of a shortcut there, instead of, you know, declaring it as a function and then having to do this dot foo equals this dot bind, whatever. So component will mount is deprecated. Component did mount is not deprecated. Component will mount got deprecated because of a long discussion. You can read on that in the React docs or in the issues on GitHub. Okay, so we have this state. So this higher order component, we're thinking of it in terms right now of a container for any button that needs to behave in a specific way. And I know you asked for a real world example, and this is going to be, you know, this can carry, so this is a fundamental real world example, but it can carry over to any example that you potentially would use in the future. So we're going to do our traditional counter app, set that state equal to 0. And then we need an increment function that is going to increment that counter in a certain way. So we're just going to call increment. We're going to call this function increment. That's going to be a method on the class, which is why I'm using this syntax of not declaring it with a const first. This is new modern JavaScript syntax. Newer versions of Babel will allow this to work. So we can say this dot set state, and instead of passing a flat object, I'm going to pass a callback. This callback is going to take the previous copy of state, and it's gonna give us the access to that previous copy of state. Now, the reason that this exists, the way that we can write our functional callback this way, our functional set state this way, is because set state behaves asynchronously. And anytime that we want to go and update a previous copy of state directly, we should be passing it in this callback manner because of the way set state was put together. And it's only because I'm relying on the data that was previously there. So in the first time this is called, I'm relying on this 0. I'm going to increment that 0 and save it by +1 on the next copy of state. So that way when I call it again, I'm relying on this data to be 1 instead of 0 in the next version. Okay? Now, you wouldn't do this for something like some string. So if I this dot set state, and if I don't care about the previous version of that string, I'm just simply going to replace it. So if I had some string on state that was going to be updated by some input, I would, e.target.value or whatever, right? And e would be passed in through here. Then I don't care about what some string, which would be defined up here, of course. I don't care about its previous copy. I'm replacing it all together with my new input, right? Because I'm going to be affecting this count every single time this button is clicked, I care about what the current version of that is, right? Because my algorithm, my function relies 100% on the previous value of count, if that makes sense. So I'm going to return an object whose count is then going to be set to the previous state dot count plus 1. So we care about the previous copy, and we don't need this, event. Okay, is there anybody who's confused about what I just did here? And Ed asked a really, really good question, and we went down that. So that syntax is passing the entire state in the callback. Yes. So whatever is currently on state. So let's console.log this prev state. And we'll say up here, foo equals bar. And then we're going to, when we invoke this, we'll be able to look at that log. So when we invoke this increment button. Okay, so our higher order component is not complete yet. So what do we need to do? We need to let's pass this increment button or increment function down as a prop to our button. So I'm going to say inc equals this dot increment. And you should definitely be a lot more semantic with what you call your props. I'm just doing this for the example. I'll just say inc by 1. Cool. We'll keep it all. Yeah, okay. So when we call this, when we use this button in multiple contexts, we're going to be able to access this prop as this increment counter. Okay. So hopefully, as soon as we get through this, you'll be able to see what the benefit of high order components can be. Okay, or a benefit. And that is sharing functionality across many, many instances. Because this button that we're about to pass in is going to be, we can use this increment in many different ways, but we're going to affect a totally different copy of state. Okay, that's where things get really fun and exciting. By the way, you'll hear me say that a lot because every time we learn something new, I get more excited about what we're learning. So we're going to import our HOC. What did I call it? Hawk button. And it's got to be right here. There it is. That's why I had it. I didn't have the dot slash. Okay. And let's get rid of this hello world. Let's just not worry about all this craziness. And right now, we're just simply returning a button. And of course, I get something broken. Hawk button hawk. Awesome. Probably a good idea to name your components what they should be. Okay. And then, okay, so now we have a context where we can pull in our higher order component and pass any button we want to it. Okay, so let's do it. Let's refactor this so that we don't break any of this. So we're going to say const hawk button equals our hawk button, and then we're going to simply pass it our button. Because remember, this is just a function that takes a component as its argument and then sets up all the React-y stuff that we would need and simply returns that button on its own. And if I want to, I could simply swap these two out today and we shouldn't have anything breaking. Okay. So let's prove that this button is now wrapped by that anonymous class by opening up the console. Always, always, always open up your console. Take a peek at the things. Whoa, that got big fast. Let's take her down. Here we go. And let's zoom in up here so we can see our button. Okay, so here's our button. Here's our React application. Anonymous class is a component that is wrapping up our button. Okay. And this is the button that we passed into it. So remember, we passed in the button component and it became this button. And we could virtually call this, so just to not confuse us, let's call it main button, so that you can see that it becomes what it's supposed to, right? Like it's the thing that got passed into our class. And think of these as functions, right? So this function, the function that returns this DOM context. Cool. So nothing's broken. In fact, nothing's super valuable to us at this point. So let's make sure we use those props. And we're going to get rid of these styles. And let's take those props and let's say increment or on click. We're going to call that props.increment. Okay. And let's make sure we render out the count, which we don't have on our props yet. And so to be able to do that, we need to go back here and pass that count down to our button that we're returning. Okay. So now as we click, something should be happening, but I think we have inc by 1 is what we need to call this increment. There we go. Okay. Let's head back over here and let's take a look at what our state is doing on main button. The props that are coming into main button have a count and an increment by 1. Our class's state is 3. We keep pressing, we're affecting that state. Okay. So far, these principles, nothing has affected what you already know about React. This is something you could achieve in just the standard React, class component manner. Where things start to get fun are when we can use this in a different context. So I'm going to say const secondary button returns a button. Okay, returns a button on hover this time. Virtually does the same exact stuff as above. But instead, we're going to call on hover. And I'm going to say button 2, not at. And I'm going to say button 1 now that we have 2. So now we need to throw this into our ecosystem. Okay. Pass it around. And, can't declare 2 things. Call it 2. Okay. Of course, we break things as we refactor them. And then, pardon me, I'm going to sneeze real quick. Maybe. Maybe not. Okay. Sorry. Holy cow. This is a bad one. Okay. Wow, I hate that. Okay, so let's make sure. My gosh, this is crazy. Okay. So let's put both of these buttons on screen. And to do that, we're just going to use the old version. Like basically, there's this thing called div bloat. You can use a thing called react.fragment here. If you're interested in learning more about that, we can talk about that later. But now we have 2 buttons whose context. Oh, this one's not working. Why would that not be working? Oh, secondary button. No, come on. Let's take a look. Let's do some debugging. I have a console error. On hover, duh. On mouse, enter. Sorry. Okay. So now We're incrementing. It's just going slower. Appropriately. I don't know why there's a couple bugs in the program. I don't know what. Oh, it's because it's on hover. Duh. Hover and button. Now, Camry asked a really good question. Could we see these in their own files? Yes. So that way you can have like a visual representation of how this would work. So let's say main button gets its own file. Okay. And let's pull in, did I copy that? No. Let's pull in main button. Okay. And then we can just export default main button for brevity's sake. And then we could do the same thing for a new file called secondary. Come on over here. Abstract. Okay. Now inside of here, we can just import those as. So this one's on a mouse enter, this one's on a click. So this is what's cool. We have the same exact functionality of these two components, and they're used in two completely different contexts. How do we know they're used in two completely different contexts? And then also look, this is the previous copy of state. So let's take a look at that. So press this button. Notice that we incremented state by 1 for the gentleman who asked the question, but the previous version of state was 0, right? So if I click this again, the previous version of state should be 1 and then 2, right? So that's what the previous state becomes inside of that callback. It's called functional set state. You should definitely look up an article on Medium about it, because and I can point you in the right direction for the article I'm referring to, because it's really, really cool. Okay. So at this point, this is a pretty trivial example, but we have two buttons that have their very own context, but we wrote code once. We wrote the logic for both of these buttons one time, but they have their very own separate context, and they can carry over that functionality. So this is where higher order components start to flourish, is what is the functionality I want to share? Another area is in the example of the homework. So where you were working on the login system, you'll want to implement higher order components often to take care of that state, and then sort of use that as a wrapper for your application and say, oh, this user actually is logged in. It's not the front end that tells you that, it's the back end, and you'll learn how to program all of that later. But the back end will tell you how that stuff should be managed, right? And then you figure out that user is logged in or not. And if that user is logged in, you show your app, or you show the login screen, or you show the app, or you redirect back to the login screen. One of those types of things. I have used higher order components for authentication. Okay. Any questions? And I'm gonna get caught up on our Q&A thread. Sorry, Pedro, to confuse you on that. Higher order components are common in React development. You'll see if you Google higher order components, you'll see them in React code everywhere. I have used higher order components as well, like real life, another real life example, when implementing router. So React router, there is this higher order component in that library called with router that is very useful when tying in Redux to your routes. So no, to answer your question bluntly, Pedro, no, they're not common in backend because backend development does not use components. We're talking singularly the front end. What I was saying is the login systems that you'll be working with later on will be built in the back end, but then you work with them in the front end to basically determine whether or not your front end should show material or not. PM said that we should have a single source of truth for state, but is it okay to have another source of truth for state if it's stored within a higher order component? So single source of truth would be more along the lines of using a state management library like Redux. And that principle is, yes, so your PM is not wrong. It is good practices to have a single source of truth, but you haven't learned Redux yet, which sort of allows you to manage that single source of truth in a very particular way. So yes, it is okay to have other sources of truth for state stored in higher order components. It just depends on what you're trying to build. So if you have an authentication system, then you would want that logic to live within that authentication higher order component. If you have a component that needs to be reused in multiple instances and some of the functionality of that component are the same, then you would store that in its own higher order component. And that would be a source of truth, right? That anytime you have a constructor and this.state and you're holding on to that data, that is a source of truth. There's that, so to speak, there is data there that is being stored, and you work with and manipulate that data in a specific way. And this will lead us into our discussion on the object that you were given for this project. So that object full of the Instagram data. Some other common use cases for previous state, definitely, I'll link that article, might as well. Functional set states, I think they even use scores or scorekeeping. Justice Mba, really, really good job at explaining this. So when to use functional set state versus just the flat object is when you need to rely on the previous version of state. So a very common use case for functional set state, a shopping cart. What would be something in a shopping cart that you would need to update based on new input, but you need to make sure that you have the previous version of that state at your disposal and then affect it? What would be something in a shopping cart? The total price of all your items, the quantity of items, right? Those things would affect that total, okay? So that would be a very, very important thing to look into. Or to use functional set state on. Okay, let me see. Best place to store common state. Okay, now Katie, I want to muse on this for a second. I'm really not sure how/what to ask about my biggest challenge this week, which was interpreting the directions in the projects. Can I disregard them if they're making things less clear for me? I hesitate to do so because I don't want to miss accomplishing any goals that I should be. So the objectives that you learn every single week are commonly are laid out by bullet point in Training Kit. So what we're trying to do is make sure that we provide you a format that allows you to focus on those objectives, because we are objectives-based learning here at Lambda School. Our objectives make up the larger picture of the day, which makes up the larger picture of the week, which makes up the larger picture of the unit, which makes up the larger picture of the section, and then so on and so forth. So like 4 objectives are taught per day or whatever. And that day is representative of 4 days that you would learn, one of 4 days that you would learn throughout the week. So what I want you to do is focus on those objectives first, and then use if the directions are unclear, please make note of that, because if they're unclear for you, it's common. It's very, very common that it would be unclear for a lot of other people as well. So make note of what's unclear, or what's unclear being asked. And then what we can do is we can go and refactor those so that you can be guided through the projects, which you will be in turn then sort of graded on when your PM goes and looks at your code, does your group check-ins, your one-on-ones for the week, etc. So if you want a good place to look for, what is it that I'm supposed to be learning, and what does this project actually accomplish in terms of those objectives, take a look at your training kit and look at the objectives for the day. So for example, if you were learning yesterday about composition patterns, here's your 2 objectives that you should know or be able to work with by the end of that day. The assignments should lead towards those objectives. And if something is delineating away from that, let us know, and we'll make sure that we clear that up. For example, there is the refactoring that we have already taken note over about local storage. We understand that a lot of you dove into local storage and had a really rough time because there's no training kit material for it. And that's totally 100% my bad. Something that was just not that we either intended to put in and we're going to be putting in. So there will be new material soon forthcoming on local storage that you can reference back to if you're interested in it. So yeah. So yeah, hopefully that does help. If you want to look at the end of every single module, so this is a module, like React tooling is a module, you'll see that you have some review at the very bottom of each day, where it's like, oh, did you do these are the challenges from the objectives. And it's like, these are mental notes that you should be talking about with your project manager on Fridays, and be like, oh, this is important stuff that I should be able to pretty much do. And it's like, oh, Friday afternoon came along, I feel like I kind of missed on a few of the objectives this week. Let me go back and work on those challenges again and see how well I can do. So Ryan Clausen asks, can you go through component will unmount? Dismount, it should be unmount, right? I'm getting a console warning on my login page. I believe it's because I'm storing the username to the login file's local state. I know where there's some other workarounds with CWD. Yeah, I don't think there's unless it just recently came out, I don't think there's a lifecycle method called component will dismount. It will be called component will unmount. Yeah. So I can show you, I can do a quick rundown on that, but I want to stick with where we wanted to go earlier. So let's circle back to that. Cool, Ryan? Okay, so the last 3 things we're going to talk about. We'll look at the API. So we're going to look at the, sorry, my watch just triggered. Couple of things we'll go over first. We're going to look at the data set that we were given for this project, for the Instagram clone. We're going to talk about why I think it's a good idea to separate out the comments in their own state, but why it's not necessary. Okay. Then the last thing, or the next thing we'll do is I'll just look at the API for local storage, and then we'll look at the API for unmount, and then I'll give you a break. We'll come back and we'll talk about style components. And hopefully we end a little bit early, but I'm not going to hold my breath on that because that's a lot to get through. Okay, this dummy data. It's an array of objects. Each object is representative of a single what. If you were to name this a certain thing that you want to work with, what would this object be in terms of, I love how Steven put it, it's a poist. It's like a moist post. Sorry, I have moist triggers, any of y'all. Okay, it's a post, right? It's a post about no worries. I hope you can take the joke. So it's a post that represents an Instagram post. Okay, so there is user data. Yes, I could see why you would call it user data, Adam. You're not wrong. But this is definitely representative of a post that you would potentially see on Instagram. There's data associated with things that you could potentially interact with on the page here. So things that you could interact with is who wrote the post, a little thumbnail image, the post background image, how many likes, you do it for the gram, right? A date, a timestamp of when it was posted, and then potential comments from other users on your post. Now, in terms of what you will be working with in the future, this data will not just be given to you in a JSON file, and then you'll have to use vanilla JavaScript to go and update and store, delete and create that data as necessary. This would live on a separate computer somewhere called a server. And that server would then give you communication access for persistent storage, like in a database. So some things that would be separated here would be a user has a post, okay? So there's a relationship between the user there and then the post data, like this stuff. And then each post has a number of comments that are also owned by users. So there's a lot of relationships going on here. You're going to be learning about this ad nauseum in the next couple months, okay? So in the grander scheme of things, when you're requesting this information and working with this information, you will have the ability to send this information to your server via HTTP, Hypertext Transfer Protocol, what you'll be using, like what is found up here in your URLs, right? So you'll learn about that next week, how you deal with that on the front end, and you'll be working with live servers next week, and it's gonna be really fun. You're gonna really love it. But the idea here is that comments would be its own separate array, which is why for this project, I would, me personally, take this comments section and I would remove it from the actual, not necessarily remove it, but I would pass this entire comments section and store it in its own component. And we'll call that C, capital C, which would have its own state object that would be mapped to those comments, which is an array of then objects. What would be the pros and cons for me to slice my data set up in this manner? Well, that's a good question, so I'm glad you all asked that. The first pro would be that you're working now with any of your function handlers. You're working at a specific level or a more succinct level that is tied to your user input. So we have our user input field. That's what this, let's say that this comment section, prints this out as an input field. And we would take this user input and send that up through and then just store that on this comments array, right? User hits submit, it goes into the comments array, bada bang, bada boom, we're good to go. If I were to take this and leave it on the post, the algorithm becomes a little bit trickier because I'm going to add a new comment. Okay, so I'm going to add a new one of these that would then need to go up through a function handler that is passed down as props and then up through to my outer component that is controlling the state. There's nothing wrong with this approach. However, let me tell you why the algorithm is a little bit more complicated than just managing it as an array of comments down here. Because now I'm passing this object up through multiple components. They call this prop drilling in React, which is a common, like, no, I don't want to call it a code smell, but people gawk at it often, where you have a bunch of nested components, like many, many generations deep, and then you're passing data through handlers and passing that bubbling up. But here's what has to happen at this point. As soon as this object that we're trying to store on this array gets up to the giant data set, then we have to loop over our dummy data proper, find by username or by some unique identifier the post that has an ID or something to which this comment belongs to. So there's an extra step to our algorithm. The step is loop over dummy data, find the object that we want to update that object's comments. It's a little bit more tricky. As opposed to, oh, I'm just going to pass this information through my handler to my comment array. Now, I don't care which way you did it, and neither will your boss. Your boss will care about results. Can a user effectively add comments to an array? Your boss may care about performance at some point, which some would argue that this would be more performant, but you're also going to be working with servers that handle this type of find by ID and update for you. So you'll never have to actually touch something like this. This will happen on the server. So this is more getting you attuned to and preparing you for important stuff that's coming in the next couple of months, and getting you. Also, it's a really good exercise in architectural decisions and ideas. So I'm gonna stop and pause for a couple of questions that I saw that came through. Chance said that a con to this approach is it's confusing. Sure, if it's confusing to you, that's a con. I agree. I think it's simpler, but we can disagree, and that's fine. We're engineers, right? We're not paid to solve problems that we already know how to solve. We're paid to find solutions to problems that we don't know how to solve mostly. So, Kat said, use methods on an array and it's more nested than other key value pairs. Yeah, that's definitely a pro for sure, Kat. 100%. Yeah, just use that, push, slice the state, return it, this.set state right there. And then Hargo mentioned that components will handle their own data. I love it. Sam said less props being passed along, a longer path in the component tree, which is, yeah, that's exactly what I said. Jordan said, I think you should just force us to store the comments in its own state. And maybe the instructor mentions that it's not best practices necessarily, because I think this is where a lot of confusion came from on Tuesday. Very good observation, Jordan. If we were to give you direction on every single detail, especially something like this, where it's like, we wanted you to figure it out, I think personally we'd be giving you a little bit of a disservice there. Not arguing for the sake of argument. And there's definitely a fine line between too much confusion and too much like information given out. But yeah, I apologize for the confusion, but this type of stuff you're going to find often. I'm not saying it's best practices, and I will never use that term. I hate the term best practices. It's absolutely garbage to me. Good practices and bad practices exist. There is no such thing as best practices. Because when React.js came out, guys, there was 1,400 Medium articles on best practices in React, and it had just barely launched. Like, who had time? And we didn't even let React breathe before we were trying to figure out how to change it, right? So for me, best practices is not a term that I use. I use good practices and code smells or bad practices. In my opinion, neither of these are code smells. So if you came to a conclusion in one way or another, 100% you're doing what it should be. Code smell is just a bad practice. Like it's a clicky jargon term for bad practices. So Frank asked a good question. How many levels of nesting would you normally stick to before it becomes prop drilling? There is no finite answer to that, but as soon as you're passing a handler around, 3 or 4 nested components, you may want to consider how your state is wired up. So, by the way, Jordan, I only have love for you, my friend. I really, really appreciate the feedback and the comment. I would hope that we can be open and honest about how we feel, and maybe my perspective helps you see something, or maybe it just makes you even more mad. But hopefully it's the former. If it does make you more mad, or if anyone's mad, please just reach out to me. This is the environment for these things to be learned in. These types of practices and these types of ideas. This is safe, right? Lambda School, we are family, and we all love each other, and we're all best friends, and we're learning this really, really hard thing. And some of us feel like we can't do it, but I promise you that I'm 100% approachable. So if you have any of that type of feedback, just DM me. I may not respond right away, but I'm here, 100% supportive of your learning. So. What do you think about having event emitters to skip prop drilling? If you can wire something up in code and show me what you mean, Sam, I would love to muse with you on the practice. So wire something up and show me what it means when you say having event emitters to skip prop drilling. The other thing you can do is look into react.context. I love that API. It's not built for the solution to prop drilling, but people are using it as such. It's built for a lot of other things, but yeah, the context API is real cool. And you'll learn about Redux, where you would handle this type of stuff later on. Adam, 100% agree with you. I feel like this week was a model of real life, and life is really hard sometimes. And yeah, you're going to be learning about single page applications next week. It may feel a little simpler to some, may feel a little more complicated to others, but then you get into Redux and you're like, the house is on fire. What am I going to do? And then you're just all of a sudden pros at all this stuff, and you're building it. So is there a way to pass a reference to the post comment is trying to comment on? So if you're using the bubbling method, you can just do post at post ID. Maybe passing post ID as a prop to comments. Yeah, so in the real world, Hargo, that's a very, very good question. In the real world, what will happen? Let me clear my garbage drawing. In the real world, what will happen is this post will have a unique post ID. For now, you can match. This is a very unique string. 100% will be unique to every post that is used, or it should. So you can use that. Or the timestamps should be unique enough. So yeah, you would pass that down and say, I want to identify this post by whatever way possible. Oh, there you go, Hargo. Cool. Awesome. Okay. I mentioned that we would talk about one more thing before we got to, oh yeah, local storage, and then we'll be done. Local storage is dead simple, okay? It's built into the window, but you don't have to use window dot to make it work. But if you look at window dot local storage, you will see an API. By API, I mean application program interface, or something that I can work with within the React ecosystem. For example, window dot, let's see, string dot is an API, right? Because I have methods that I can work with on that API, like string dot length is a method. Well, I guess it's a property. String dot to uppercase, right? So everything you work with in JavaScript is essentially an application program interface. Objects are the king. So in our window, in our browser, we actually have similar concepts. We have the local storage API built into our browser. And there are 3 methods on local storage. The first one is setting an item. So I'm going to say local storage.setItem, and I'm going to label what I want this item to be set as. Food. And then I'm going to pass the data that I want associated with that item. And I'm going to just lowercase this for convention's sake. Food could be banana. Awesome. What just happened? Well, there is an object or a data storage inside of your window, inside of your browser, which is called local storage. You can click on the application tab and see what's set there. So if I open that up, notice that GitHub put a bunch of stuff, because I'm at GitHub right now, put a bunch of stuff in my local storage. Check your local storage sometimes. You can kind of find out what companies are putting in there for you. But notice that my food, banana, key value pair are in local storage. I can have access to this data now. It's stored as long as I don't refresh the page. Let's see. Let's see if this persists. It persists across refresh. Okay, so session storage will persist in a different manner. But if I go and close this browser and come back, it should be gone. And it's relative to the URL in which you're working. So for you, that'll be like localhost 3000, okay? Because you're working off a React app. Food is retrievable. The data that is found, the key value pair, notice it's saying key value, very straightforward. Key value pair of banana, so the data is banana, the key to reference that banana is food. So back in my console, I can now get that item. And retrieve it, banana. Okay, I can also update that item by calling set item again. Okay, go back to my application. It swapped it out. The last portion of that API is local storage. And notice I'm not even calling window. I don't even need to call it. Local storage.remove item food will remove it altogether from my data storage. Okay. Caveat. I have an array of integers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Local storage dot set item ints, we call it ints, will equal array of int. Okay, check my application. Uh-oh, that doesn't look like an array. It just looks like a string of numbers. This is by design, okay? There is a way to fix this. And it's because it can only take in string representations of arrays and objects that you want to store here so that you don't get a bunch of bloat. It's just a key value pair where the key is on the left and on the right is a string representation of what you just stored there. I know there's a couple of questions coming in. I'm ignoring them intentionally for a second. So the last thing that you want to make sure you do before you store your array of integers is to stringify it using the JSON API object where we're going to turn this array into a stringified array first. So let's go reset that and let's take a look at what our application looks like. Notice it's actually a string representation of that array, and we have the brackets again. And look, we can even play around with it as if it's an array. Okay? But what happens when we request that? get item int, well, we get a stringified array. So what do I have to do to change that? JSON.parse the whole thing. Remember, this function, local storage.getItem, is going to return me a string representation of my array. So if I have a string representation of an array, I can parse it back into the data set that it's supposed to be. In this case, an actual array, not just the string representation of the array. Sounds weird, but that's the technique. That's what you have to do to work with local storage. How do I get rid of this? Thank you. Because I want to take a picture of all this. Well, okay. Okay, cool. I want to take a picture of all this for you all so that you can practice and play around with that. Okay, let me answer a couple questions that just came through. Any difference between window.local storage and local storage? Window is just there by default. So just use local storage. Hopefully, Adam asks, how would you retrieve an apple if the whole produce department is in local storage with the key of food? So hopefully I was able to answer that with the parsing and stringifying. Because remember, right here, let's go do this again. This right here is going to be what? What is this function right here going to return? Yeah, you could do something like contains apple. Yeah, it's an array, right? Right, Frank? So I can now select an array's index value. There is no fifth index. Ooh, it didn't like that. Oh, it's because I did it in the wrong place. So what is that? What is this representing now? Array of integers at index 4. Okay. So what if this was an object? Well, same thing. You just find the value of what it should be. So if this was food, and this food had an array, nested array of a bunch of stuff, you would then be able to retrieve that respectively with that key, right? In our case, we just wanted the 4th index off of the array. So this returns an array or an object or whatever it should be, and then you can use it as an array or an object. Just fun things there. You could store that. You could store it as a reference and then reference it as an array if that makes it clearer in your mind. So if I wanted to say const my parsed array, but need to stringify it, of course, or parse it. And then I have a reference to it wherever I want. So I could then, it would be my object or my array, right? At index 3 should give me 4. Okay. Always wondered, why are these methods on JSON object, by the way? Yeah, JSON has some cool stuff on it. If you ever want to look at what you're working with, just go into your browser, look at the array, look at the API, parse, stringify, parse, stringify, parse, stringify. It's just, that's how you work with the JSON all caps object. Okay, I've overstayed my welcome on this portion. So let's do this. I want you to play around with this for a couple of minutes and then take a good break. So let's meet back here at 10:25. So in 10 minutes. And then I will brush over the component will unmount, and then we got to get to our actual lesson today. So play around with this for a couple minutes and then just take a good solid break and be back here. I guess we'll just do a 10-minute timer on the screen. Cool. Okay, we're making our way back. We'll get started in just a few seconds. Man, y'all are a good group. You're asking good questions, which leads me to believe that you are all really curious and excited about these concepts. So yeah, Ryan, if you're good to go, if you're any more confused, I guess, about that, or if anyone's confused at all about component will unmount, you know, we can chat more about that in the future. You can DM me. I can make some time between now and the end of day tomorrow to chat with you about that stuff. So if you're interested in that, let me know. We can set something up. But for now, let's just dive into what we're looking at. I hope I answered all of your questions. There's some that I'm looking at that may have come through, but I hope with clarification on the concepts that all of your questions were covered. Let's look at something really, really awesome. Styled components. So just out of curiosity, this anonymous poll, how many of you watched that styled components little video that I put together? Come on, Polly. Wow, operation timeout. Okay, there we go. Make this anonymous. Anonymous. And then we will just add an option. Come on, man. True, false. Okay. Yeah, so there was definitely a link to the React Amsterdam talk where Max Stoiber unveiled this project. And you kind of got the opportunity to look through that, which, yeah, totally cool guy. I love Max to death. But the video that I recorded that had the examples in training kit. Now, I'm gonna just cover some ground quickly and get to some of the cool parts of style components. So if you have not watched that, I recommend, it's a short enough video that you could go back and watch it and go through the training kit material. It's just one single objective. And I promise you it's a fun one. So, but today, what I want you to do is sort of focus for the first portion of your afternoon, maybe the first hour of your afternoon, on styled components, because you already actually know everything you need to know. It's just sort of converting this into a JavaScript format. So what's cool about styled components, it's just CSS. And you were taught by one of the world's best instructors in, like, I would argue, one of the best instructors of all time for the HTML and CSS portion of your curriculum, Josh Nell. So you know CSS. You know a lot more about CSS than a lot of people out there. So you're just going to apply all of that knowledge to this really cool trick. It's just a fancy trick. And it's like, oh, it's combining what you know about React and JavaScript and CSS. And it's like, bada bing, bada boom, I know a really, really cool trick that a lot of people are using to style their applications today in a fun way. And it's easily my favorite material in the course. I love teaching about this. This and Redux are easily my favorites. Style components. So make sure you take a look at this training kit documentation. Dustin did an amazing job with this. He's so good. I love Dustin too. Style components, you can watch the video. I recorded the video, but Dustin did all the work. So it made it easy for me. And we're just gonna start kind of assuming this sort of syntax right here. But let's go over to style components. So you can see the beautiful documentation, which was built using style components, and how it's laid out. So notice they have really fun examples that you can go and play around with. So right here, just look at this button. So look at this, it's a button. And I bet you didn't know that you can actually invoke a function with a template string. So it just needs to know that everything in the string will get parsed and serialized the right way. That's an ES like 7-ish feature. I don't remember when it came out, but you can actually invoke a function which .a is a function that returns an anchor tag with all of these properties applied to it, styled. No more adding class name, no more figuring out like specificity and inheritance. It's like that anchor tag is going to be this way every single time. Notice the other fun part about being able to use template literal string. Okay? You get, sorry, let me zoom in a little. You get the ability to use this really cool pattern. Since we're in template literal syntax, we can just write $ curly brace, and we can inline ourselves some delightful and delicious JavaScript. Okay? Which in this case, it's going to be a function that will return what's called props.primary. So if this props.primary exists, then apply this CSS styling to it. Okay? Let's figure this out. Let's take a look. Let's dive in. You're going to love it. We're going to use this same example that I've been playing around with, just so that we can stay in the same realm of things. And I'm going to create a file called styled button. Not a new, yeah. Not dot button. Okay, we'll import React. Are snippets supported in this yet? Nope. Okay, maybe they are. I just need to integrate with them. Oh, did I not give you the link last time? I could have sworn I copied and pasted the live link over that you could have used. There you go. There you are, buddy. Okay, so we're going to make a styled button. And we're going to set that equal to style.button. Where does all this come from? Well, styled is not defined. We must import it. This is not a node module, so we must download it as a dependency. So this is like just like doing a yarn install. This is Code Sandbox's version of doing a yarn install. We're going to run for styled components. And my styled button is going to have a bunch of proper styles. Okay? So here's where it gets really cool. We're making this sort of like a global idea, a global button that we can reuse everywhere. So we're just going to export it right away. Just going to export the function, not as a default. Okay? No need to worry about default. We don't need a default because we can export as many of these as we'd like. We can build our global styles this way. It's like, I want my buttons to all look the same. I want all of my anchor tags to look the same. I want all of my H1s to look the same. All we're going to do is just make it work like this. Okay? So we're going to declare the thing that we want styled by pulling in the styled item. And then notice that you're going to have all your elements just like you normally would. You have your buttons, your anchors, your P tags, your divs, your spans, all of those things that you would need to be able to style in a common website or web application will come on the styled API. Okay? Yeah, so if you're going to do this in your project this afternoon, so Jasmine, don't try and follow along right now. I'm going to give you a little bit more instruction. But yes, it would be a yarn add styled components. Sorry that I said yarn install. Yarn wasn't a thing when I learned how to develop. I've used NPM for many, many years, switched over to yarn, still reference things as install all the time or whatever, -- save, okay? So at its core right now, nothing great is happening. Let's get some of those cool element properties that Dustin put together so we don't have to reinvent the wheel here. Formatter's not working properly. Okay, so now we can import this styled button wherever we want to use it. And who remembers the syntax for importing a non-default object? So if I want to use this in my app here, import the item in curly braces from the module, right? So the idea, import styled button from styled button. Not hawk button. Come on, bro. Okay. And truthfully, we should call this something else. Because if we're going to make it dynamic, this should just be called styles. Okay. And now I can come in here and I can say styles. So I'm basically, what am I doing right now? I am creating a component library, right? I am saying that I want to be able to use a bunch of different items that I can predefine and then use anywhere in my application. I promise you, you will go to work at a company as long as it's an established application, and you will have some pattern that's like this, where you have your common global styled components built. Actually, I don't even know if we need React here. I don't think it's using React till later. We'll find out. Where you have your common components built that you're going to share, and you're just going to be able to implement them. And this is the thing that we care about as developers. We don't care about having to worry about all this stuff. We care about the implementation details. Like, how easy is it for me to just grab something from a file and put it in? Well, I would argue that it's very easy. And of course, it doesn't work my first time. Maybe it's because I actually do. Here, let me get rid of all these files. This is what I get for going off the cuff. Okay, got to debug. Oh, you know what? It's because, I know why. I know why. Hold on. I'm using it this. No? Okay. Going to refresh the page. Always start with the refresh. Okay. Jeez, I don't know why it's not working. Give me a second. Oh, it is there. What? Color white. Where's the background? Oh, I get it. Okay, so because I was using Dustin's awesome example, we don't have anything as a default for the background. So let's make sure we add that because everything's white. It's beautiful. It's going to be beautiful as soon as I get it to work. But the background color of this was not defined. There we go. Oh, Steven, you want the live link. Okay. I'll get you the live link. We're doing it live. I saw a light bulb just go off in Hargo's comment. This is amazing, programmatically applied styles. Yes. So we're basically just saying all the buttons in our application, whoa. All the buttons in our application are going to behave pretty much the same way. Now, here's what's cool. This is our default background, right? Classroom. Not everyone can edit. So I don't get everyone's cursors everywhere. So this is where this starts to become really fun, right? And you'll see this in the video. I was going to muse on other other examples, but we're gonna take it a step further than what the video that I put together takes you, and what's even in our training. But this is where it becomes really fun. I can take this inside this template string, and I can pass this style button some props. Okay, and based off of those props, I can do some logic. So I can say, if our props.danger exists, then return the string background, and then this would be red for now. We'll fix that. Else, give me null. Like I don't care about this. Now, what is this going to do? Well, by rules of what you already know in CSS, if this prints, right? If this rings true and we print this template string, and it's as if this just evaluates, this function right here evaluates to this, then which one of these is going to be the background color? Will it be this blue or will it be red? The lowest one, right? That's something you already know. So you could just default your colors, and then it saves you that step of having a white button that we couldn't see. The question came in, where did styled come from on line 2? Styled comes from the node module dependency that we just installed using Code Sandbox's dependencies. Come on, brother. There we go. Notice it's right here. So it's a node module. Carlos said, is everything to the right of style dot equal to an expected element? So style dot button means it will start off with the default properties of a button until you edit it. Yes. Bingo. 100 emoji. You did it. Yeah, I mean that's exactly the case. It's that simple. It's like I need an HTML element, and I'm going to style it my own way, and I'm going to reuse it all over my application. So what needs to happen? By this is the React tie-in. This is where props comes in. This is a React component. This is a React component. I can't state that enough. This is a React component, okay? So props is a thing because we're in React. So by this definition, how do I make this function trigger so that our background becomes red? What do I have to do? Got to pass the right prop to my button. Yeah, let's see. Danger. Just like that. And McKay, what you said is 100% correct. But let me just show you something. This equivocates that. They're the same thing. If it exists as a prop, it will default to true. Just if it exists, it's true. Right? Like, did they not set it to anything? Oh, it's true. Could I default danger to this? Sorry, buddy. Just not built into JSX that way. Good question, though. I love where your head's at. I don't think there's a case where I'd want to bang a property like that. What about danger? Try it. Danger, this is trying to evaluate what? It's trying to look for a thing called danger. This is just a shortcut for saying equals true. Okay? So in our case, it's just defined, and there it is. That's an ugly red. It's just like very overwhelming. So let's look at the danger here. Okay. Go back to our styles. Go back to here. Whoa, 2 semicolons. A little bit warmer for the danger. And then if I want to go back to, so to show you that I can reuse them, just get rid of this prop. I'll have my primary set to my default, and then danger. Okay. Pedro asked, could we use less? If you want to use less, go for it, brother. Looking for a thing called danger. Okay, let's see. Carlos said, making my own React strap is so cool. Yeah, I agree. I don't think that's sarcasm. I'm not going to treat it as sarcasm. But if it is, you know, React strap is great. Either way. And yeah, what Carlo just said, in Create React App 2.0, you can use Sass or less. You can use less as well in CRA 2. Can you style one of the original buttons? Yeah, I can style any button I would like. I'm going to show you an abstraction to this. It's going to be really cool. Okay, so give me a second. But I want to answer Brian's question. So now instead of having multiple class names on elements, we'd have to make multiple components. Or would having multiple props be the equivalent of multiple classes? So yeah, you just make your bare minimum. So how this is going to work, how do we make this work conceptually and sort of get away from those old class names and old classes and whatnot? Well, the idea here is that you don't necessarily have to get away from that in general. This doesn't necessarily need to replace all style sheets. It's just a way that you could potentially do that if you wanted to. There's a trade-off to everything, right? So your goal is to go and research the trade-off on your own time and figure out which one you like more. We're exposing you to the technology that's very rampant and very, very visible in the field. However, this, if you wanted to, you want to approach it this way. And here's how you're going to approach using styled components for the rest of your life. This is the question you're going to ask yourself when you build a component, a reusable component. What is the bare minimum that I need this component to do, and the bare minimum that I need this component to look like, and design it for that? Okay? Button, bare minimum needs to look like what you determine. Needs to have the ability to accept an on-click handler. Okay? Then you can just write it the same way that you do everything else. When you want to go and tweak things, just use this pattern that we just went over to make it reusable in a different context. So let's try it again with another prop. So props.warning. Warning. Wow. Props.warning. Let's go grab the warning color. I might actually sneeze this time. Okay, awesome. That feels good. So now I can come in here and I can just simply change the property to give me a warning. Adam asked a very, very good question. So how do we style a component that needs to have on clicks and everything like that? But before I get to that, because it's the last thing that I'm going to look at here in just a second. If you have multiple components in your styles.js, is there a way to import multiple exports to be used in a component? Yes. You can alias them with the wildcard. Import all as style. And then Okay. Doesn't like, that should work, but let's stick back to the other, I don't know why, oh, because I don't have it down here either. Derp. Common pattern. Let's steer clear of it from now because it's a little confusing, and just do stop. But if you have, 15 reusable components, yeah, do something like aliasing. Okay. Oh, adding a hover to this or things like that happen through class changes or toggles. Nope. You're in CSS right here, brother. Let's take a look. How do we do it? Basics, advanced. Come on, give me what I need. Adapting based on props. So notice the ideas there. Extending styles. Ooh, we're going to touch on this in just a minute. And yeah, note that, yeah, we would just have those types of things. Okay. Pseudo selectors, that's what we're looking for. I know I just want to make sure that I have like all my ducks in a row. There you go. It's as simple as that. In your CSS, it's all just regular CSS. Pass it a hover object. That's pretty trippy. Didn't refresh. There we go. It really is that simple to get everything you need. Media queries, all of that, just like normal in your component. Okay. The last thing that I want to mention on this is what you can look at in your training kit as, or, basically from the other styles. So if you want to extend the styles that you have from, say, the regular button, you can create, what is this? It's a higher order component. Styled can take in what you declare it as. So inside of my styles, I can say const, export const modified button equals styled button, styled button, and extend it with a couple more styles. So I could do virtually anything I want here. If I wanted to invert this, I could say that the color is the background. And then the border is the background. And then background is, so now my modified button is just simply an inverse. I pass it in up here, pull it in up here, right? If you notice, I started getting some IntelliSense right there. Ah, need some children. It's not getting that border, and I'd have to take some time to kind of debug it, but yeah. How about changing the background on the danger button to on hover? Well, you'd want to just make sure that your hover class, sorry, navigated away as if I was in a text editor. You'd probably want to just make sure that your hover selector is before, and then just change your background. So you're saying if you wanted it to be specifically on the only on the danger, okay? This is a template string, so we can treat it as such. It's probably going to format really ugly. See the ugly formatting? But that's only on danger and none of the others. So you would just do it wherever your props is called. You could pass as many styles as you want. Just keep it in your template string. It's a day full of buttons. A lot of buttons. Questions? You mean over the, oh wait, did we talk about my previous question? Adam McKinney said, what would it look like adding an on-click in the styles, particularly if you want to trigger? So let's take a look. Adding additional props. So go up here. Nothing there. Event listeners. Okay. Okay, here you go. How do style components work within a component? If you're familiar with importing CSS into your components, like CSS modules, you'll be used to doing something like this. Baderp, baderp, skaderp, baderp. Very similar to all the examples you've ever seen in your life. But now we can just say that we have some components that we pull in and simply pass those components their proper clicks. So you wouldn't actually do that in the styles. What you need to make sure you do is you perform that logic here. So if I have a clicky, I'm just going to leave it typoed like that because YOLO, that alerts I was clicked, then you simply just give your styled component that on click. And it should, based on the documentation that I just read, clicky. This, okay, we need to convert this. Class, app, extends, react.component, render, before return. And which one did we modify? The first one? Woo! Just like norm. Your buttons that you style, not just buttons, your components that you style, don't give one care about the data that they'll be associated with. The only thing that you will care about when you style your reusable component is how it's presented to the user. And that's the glory here, because everything else just behaves the same. perform your logic. You get your buttons, you get what you want, and they look exactly the way they want them. I always have trouble adding width styles using this. Can you demo? Yeah. So like if our buttons need to have a certain width, 150 pixels or something. Now they're all pixelated. Not sure if that helps, CJ, but let me know if you need any other questions. Can we go over the sprint challenge? Okay, could do that for a couple minutes, only because I have so much. If there's anything I didn't answer, let it be known right now. Could definitely just briefly show you what you're building for your sprint challenge tomorrow. It's a Lambda Times project. So I believe you worked on this a couple weeks ago. You're going to be focusing, and a lot of the instructions may seem similar to the homework. So look at those. So you're going to be just kind of refactoring this application to make your tabs, your content. You're going to be using prop types this week. You're going to be using styled components. As a stretch problem, you're going to be refactoring the app so that it uses all styled components. There should be no class name props on any component. To truly test this, delete the CSS file. You'll find a carousel component, so your carousel will be a stretch. A login system will be the third stretch. So it's really just Lambda Times now written in React, and you get a chance to dive in and look at the components that are given to you in terms of, and the instructions that you have there. So like, oh, this is giving you a hint as to what you need to put in these sections, in these areas, okay? Let's go back to where like data comes in. I believe that would be, let's see, content right here. We're pulling in your first problem is to pull in that data the same way you did this week. Make sure you get the functionality of this change selected tab just right. There's a lot here. It's really, really fun. This filter cards is a big deal. Ooh, that's one thing we did forget to talk about today is the filter stuff. Oh, Jordan asked a really good question. And then CJ, so CJ, not buttons, but elements. Height 450 pixels, width 450 pixels, background color red. Yeah, if you're having trouble with like widths and heights and stuff, you just have to keep on pushing, playing around with things. I have trouble with that stuff all the time too. You'll get better and better as time goes on. But yeah, if this was to be like a flex container, if we wanted to make a container really quick, so let's just say export const flexidiv equals styled.div, and we said display flex direction column, justify content space between, or something like that. Come back into index, pull in our flexi div, and change our div to be our flexi div. All these should be children, and they should just lay out proper. My opinion on CSS modules versus CSS and JS, like style components. I haven't used CSS modules very much, so I don't have an opinion. I can't remember. I know that my last company that I worked for, we made a very specific decision to go with Glamorous, which is very much the same thing as style components in a lot of ways. It's just a different API. There's a lot of different stuff. So yeah, I'm not sure. I know that we deliberated for a while, and I gave a presentation on glamorous and how cool it would be. And my boss is like, let's do it. I like that better than style components or CSS modules. Do the styles show in the dev tools? I'm super glad you asked that question. I guess this was my React app. Okay, so where would they be in the dev tools? Well, yeah. Notice what's happening under the hood. You're getting your classes, but you don't have to define them. Notice this last button has a bunch of different classes. It has specific styles that are being applied to it. So where do these all come from? Where do these styles come from? Well, styled components, based on the component that is mounted to the screen, is actually going to inject a style sheet for you. That's how this all works. It's gonna be all minified and uglified. And so it'll only put the styles in your header or in your head of your document that are absolutely necessary. So yeah, if I wanted to go then and refactor a bunch of things, well, notice what the specificity is getting us here. Well, I could just go and I could say, well, I want that border radius to be a bit steeper. I could come in here and just like normal, I could tweak things around, you know? None. Cool. Other questions? Hopefully I answered any questions that you had. Hope you have a fun time playing around with style components. I personally really, really love it. But yes, if I didn't show you something or you need me to answer something and clarify, let me know. I have a really, really busy afternoon today, but I can, between meetings and stuff, I could squeeze you in. So, or I could direct your PM to the right answer and you could work with them. Okay. I'm hungry. You guys hungry? Hungry for styled components, hopefully. I'm just kind of waiting around for the last couple of questions to come through. The reason this is good is because it keeps the styles in your component rather than the CSS. Yep. It's just an easier way to write things. Context switching is huge for developers, which is why Node is a thing, because we can write JavaScript on the front end, Node on the back end, it's JavaScript all across the thing. But I really want you to focus on that idea of like how seamless it is to write your components. And you're in React. Not only are you in JavaScript, you're also just in React. And you build out all of your components in a special way, right? So it's just JavaScript. So you don't have to context switch. And yes, as Camry said, it's also scoped to your components so CSS doesn't override each other throughout a code base, which is one of the definite benefits of using this. You get, like I just showed you in the browser, you get a style sheet per component mounted. So whatever is necessary, like these buttons are all mounted here, we need these styles. When these components leave the screen and new styles come up, you only get the CSS necessary there. And yeah, use that extension. I need to get that extension for VS Code. Thank you, Kevin. It looks nice. Cool. All right, gang. Go get some lunch. Come back, focus your first part of your afternoon on styled components, and then return back to polishing up your Instagram clone. And we shall meet again.